tonight, Fox Carolina sports director Beth Houle speaking with our Clemson football expert about how legislation could affect the college football world.
Joined by Clemson alum Patrick Sapp. We're talking about NIL because Congress met yesterday to discuss the role that the government should play in some regulations for NIL. It's a topic that has been popular the last several years, and obviously it's become a part of life for college athletes and now even some high school athletes. I think the first question, first and foremost, is do you agree that NIL is a good thing for our student athletes?
Absolutely, I do. Being a former college athlete myself, understanding the sacrifice, the time that is put into this, but also the money that, if we're talking about football specific, the amount of money that it brings into a university and an athletic program. And so for an athlete to not to be able to touch any of that outside of their scholarship now, because again, they're doing extra things. They are stars at some of these programs that attracts a lot of fans, that attracts a lot of people wanting to come to the games and buy tickets and all of those things that are relevant to the program and those opportunities. To not be able to tap into that at all, I think is wrong. So the NIL, I think, is a good thing, but I'm glad to see that somebody's starting to at least have some conversation about how do we contain this? How do we control this? How do we have some say into what a lot of these young men and women can and cannot do?
The members of Congress brought up in their meeting yesterday that there's a lot of bad faith actors in some of these contracts, and that there has been research done into some of the contracts, especially when you're talking about the high school contracts, where they're essentially just a loan that is being given to these kids. And so from that regard, it's super valuable. But it's also because a lot of these, the percent that make it, like you, to the NFL is very small, or to make it to play professional sports. And so it's really valuable for these student athletes to be able to benefit right here, right now, when they have their moment.
Exactly. I think that's a great point, is how do you benefit from it right now? And I think that's what NIL does for a lot of the athletes. But for me, it's the education too, right? Because a lot of these young men and women do not understand the value of their brand and what their brand is, right? And so the earlier you can be educated on that, I think the better decisions you make. With your social media, how you present yourself, all of those things matter. So I think the earlier you can get educated on that is best, and I think NIL brings that side of the education to it. But you're right, a lot of these contracts right now, universities can't advise these student athletes on their contracts. And so they got to stay out of the business, so to speak, right now, the way it's set up. I can't tell you, hey, take this deal, don't take that deal. And so these young men and women are left with their families and what they know about business to make these decisions. So I'm glad to see somebody stepping in. I hope that they don't over-regulate things, though. That is my concern. I would be for deferring some of this money until they graduate, or have some kind of markers in place that allow some of this money to be saved, or those guys to take care of it, some education around it, something that allow them to be able to make good decisions about the business.
Should this be the government's job? Because what we're running into is different states are creating different rules. So I understand that it's moving up the food chain, and that's why Congress is meeting about it. But should this be the government, or, and for better or worse, should this be NCAA? Or do we need a whole new body?
Governing body?
Yeah, for NIL specific.
I'm not a huge government oversight person. Personally, I'm not. But we know the NCAA can't manage this. We've seen what they've done so far. I think right now they're just quietly going away, to be honest with you, with the way that they're managing sports at this level. And then an outside entity, it all depends. But I do think on the federal level, it needs to be something in place, because states are specific to their universities and schools. And so the laws that they pass are going to support their local universities.
And that brings up the final question I have for you. What does that regulation do for recruiting? Because we've heard the opinions of what NIL has done for recruiting. So what would regulation do? Would that fix these problems, do you think? Is this what's needed?
I don't think it's going to fix the problem. I think it will help the problem. Right now, it's just, hey, however much money you want to spend, however much money you want to raise for NIL, you can. who wants to play in this space? Anybody that wants to. And so I think those are the regulations that I'm looking for from that standpoint. Recruiting is always going to be an issue, right? Kids, and I think
we have to have something to fight about.
yeah, and I think that if you look at it from the standpoint of the athlete, and I'm just talking about football specifically, every football player that goes to college wants to play in the NFL. And so a lot of decisions are going to be made about where they attend the university is, what chances do this university have to help me get to the next level. So I think we don't talk about that part enough, like money, just kids just going to run wherever the money is. That's not going to be the case. Who can get me to the next level is where most of these young men are going to go to.
Well, the NIL conversation is still only dipping our toes into it and where this can continue to go, but we appreciate your time and your insight as always, Patrick.
Thank you.